Dark Loops Productions proudly presents the Dark Loops Players, starring in a tale from the Chronicles of the Christmas Squad. The Christmas Squad meets the Time Monster. Starring Tom Buller, Stanford Carpenter, Victor Dandridge Jr., Cianna Greaves, J. Scott Jordan, and Alex Simmons. Part 1. It all started on a dark, dreary night in the soft, snowy stillness of a place called the United States of America, or USA for short. I know it was sometime in December, and I know it was close to Christmas, but the exact date is difficult to remember. For as you will come to learn, time is a very fickle thing, especially around Christmas, and double especially if you're a member of the Christmas Squad. Anyway, it was in the middle of this dark, dreary night that a dozen or so children in USA suddenly awoke in a state of panic. The older of these children struggled to understand the dream from which they had just awoken, while the younger of these children simply stood in their cribs and screamed. It was all very scary, and as this great scream rang out, the parents of the panicking children also awoke, and for the briefest of moments, panicked themselves.
There now.
Soothed Marissa's mother as she held her and dried her tears.
What's all the fuss about?
Marissa, of course, was one of the younger children. She therefore continued crying and did so until her mother's gentle words were able to calm her. Once she was sure she was all right, she laid her in her crib and returned to her room. Marissa laid there pretending to be asleep for a few more minutes, just to make sure her mother wasn't coming back. Certain she would not return, Marissa pulled the belly flap of her Teletubby to reveal a secret compartment. Inside the compartment was a big red button. Marissa pushed it 3 times as hard as she could and sat to wait. Chapter 2. In various parts of the USA, the other dozen or so children who had awoken in a state of panic were also opening secret compartments and pressing big red buttons. Some had secret compartments in G.I. Joes, some had them in Elmo dolls, some had them in Barbies, and some even had them in Beanie Babies. Ronnie was sitting up in bed, making sure her parents were not going to return, as she waited tensely for the big red button inside her favorite Barbie to flash red 3 times. You see, if all members of the Christmas Squad pressed their buttons 3 times, then shortly thereafter, everyone's buttons would flash 3 times. It was the squad's way of determining whether they had a real crisis on their hands or whether one of them had simply had a bad dream. Ronnie looked out of her window at the gently falling snow as it drifted lazily across the muffled light of the street lamp. She hoped her button would not flash. She enjoyed being a member of the Christmas Squad, but she didn't like the idea that Santa Claus might be in trouble. She thought of all the other members of the Christmas Squad and how nice it would be to see them again. But then immediately realized that if they were all together, it would be because, once again, they had to save Christmas. She did not want to have to save Christmas this year. Just as the thought passed from her mind, something caught the corner of her eye. She turned to look and in mid-turn froze in place.
Maybe if I don't see it, it won't happen.
She thought to herself, as her eyes strained to see the second flash that her half-turned head seemed to insist she should not see. Stuck in her half-yes, half-no position, she winced inwardly as the second flash came. Certain the third would inevitably follow, she let out the breath she had been holding and turned to face the Barbie button dead on. The third flash came.
There it is.
She said to herself with an air of resolve.
We have all pressed our buttons. We have all seen the flashes. We have a real crisis on our hands.
She turned to go to Allie's room, and just as she got out of bed, saw Allie standing in the doorway.
You ready?
Ronnie asked.
Mm-hmm.
Said Allie while shaking her head yes.
Okay, then come sit on the bed with me.
Allie went to the bed and Ronnie held her very close.
Close your eyes tightly.
She said as they felt the room begin to spin.
Don't worry.
She said the room was spinning faster.
Todd knows what he's doing.
Chapter 3. Todd, of course, was a member of the Christmas squad. He had had the dream, had made sure his parents were back in bed, and was now trying to get Jacob to stop running around the room. His job in the Christmas squad was to generate the quantum bubble that would allow all the members of the squad to be in the same place at the same time, or in every place at every time, depending on how you thought about quantum bubbles. Jacob's running wasn't helping. All the calculations had to be precise, and they had to be dialed in correctly on the control panel that was hidden in the secret compartment of Todd's bed. Jacob was now jumping up and down on that bed, which of course prevented Todd from doing his job. He gave Jacob a stern look, and Jacob sat down. Todd said,
"Thank you."
And Jacob just grinned. Todd turned back to his control panel, punched a few more buttons, and then pulled Jacob tightly to himself.
"Hold tight,"
he whispered to Jacob as the room began to spin. Jacob let his head fall backwards and laughed at the spinning. Then he tried to stand up. Todd grabbed him and held him down as the room spun faster and faster.
"Here we go!"
wailed Todd as the room spun so fast he could no longer keep track of it. Chapter 4.
I don't understand it, Todd.
Said Katie as she let Kyle run to the other younger children.
How did you get us all here?
Todd smiled, shrugged his shoulders, and then pointed to his control panel.
"It's all on the wrist."
Was all he had to say.
"Is everyone here?"
Asked Ashley. Her voice was somewhat tense because she was trying to keep a hold of her brother George. He had seen Kyle, Jacob, and Henry Lev playing together and was trying desperately to get to them. But since he was now an older member of the Christmas squad, he knew he had to work with Todd, Ashley, Brandon, Ronnie, Katie, Josh, and Jose in order to develop a plan.
"I think they are all here,"
said Brandon. He looked over at Ronnie and saw she was getting Allie together with Marissa, Amber, and Ellie. The four of them began playing a strange sort of screaming game in which each one screamed while looking at the others, and the others, in turn, attempted to produce a better scream. It was all great fun, but it was also very annoying to the older children who were trying to develop a plan. It also didn't help that Jessica, Skylar, and Maddie were giggling away by themselves.
Do we know where the problem is?
Asked Ronnie as the older children assembled themselves. Todd punched a few buttons on his computer screen.
It looks like Santa is having trouble right here,
said Katie as she pointed to the screen.
Yep.
Emphasized George as he pointed to the same point on the screen.
"Okay then,
said Brandon.
we should get there as soon as possible."
"Agreed,"
said Ashley.
Does everyone remember what to do?
Asked Josh.
"Yes, we do."
Ew.
Okay then, let's go.
They started to move toward the younger children.
"Remember, everyone, don't let go."
We won't.
They cheered with anticipation. They were all very nervous and somewhat giddy. Sounding excited was a way of staying calm. You see, being a member of the Christmas squad could at times be very serious business, especially with Christmas hanging in the balance. Thus, even though the magic powers they brought to bear to save Santa were the gentle, joyous powers of love and laughter, delivering those powers at the right place and time was a matter of skill. The older children knew that skill had something to do with their use of words. They weren't sure how, but they knew that their advanced ability to use words somehow made them different from the children who didn't use words as well. Further still, they knew that it was their advanced skill with words that allowed them to muster the raw powers of the younger children into an otherworldly force that could easily soften the hardest of hearts and effortlessly thin the thickest of minds. They were children to the core, to be sure. But now, with their developing mastery of words, they were beginning to enter the world of creativity. And upon entering that world, were beginning to realize the responsibility that comes with words. And with that, the older children formed a circle around the younger children. They held hands and began singing their magic song. Well, some say it's a magic song, but those in the know, they know that it's actually a very sophisticated mathematical equation whose verses work like tumblers and a finely crafted lock.
While dashing through the snow
In a
one
one-horse
open
open
sleigh,
sleigh,
Over
Over
the
the
we
fields
go.
we go.
All the way.
Laughing all the way.
As they sang ha ha ha, the younger children joined in, and as was supposed to happen, every one of them lost control and began laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing until suddenly the place they were in began to spin. The harder they laughed, the faster they spun. Some of the older children were trying to sing out more verses of the song in order to channel the flow of laughter into just the right phase. Of course, just the right phase is somewhat of a misnomer, for actually what is required of a quantum bubble is the simultaneous existence of all phases and all possible pitches at all possible amplitudes. Those in the know, however, that such a state can only be found in the uncontrollable laughter of children. And this is precisely why older children and younger children have to work together. Eventually, the older children were overwhelmed by the laughter of the others, and just at the right moment, when all possible phases and all possible pitches and all possible amplitudes existed in the same place at the same time, the entire group of children lost track of everything and were instantaneously in every place at every time. Then, just like that, it stopped. They were no longer laughing. Everything was quiet. They were in a much different place. Every one of them knew this place. It was the place where Santa Claus was in trouble. Thank you for tuning into part 1 of The Christmas Squad Meets the Time Monster. Make sure to tune in tomorrow for part 2 as our caroling crusaders attempt to save Santa's mind from the crunching clutches of the Time Monster.